The railroad business was born in the form of rudimentary horse-drawn carts, maneuvering over rails in coal mines and stone quarries in the 1820s.
The whole principle is that you have steel wheels on steel rails, and that lowers the coefficient of friction. You could pull more with less power on a steel rail than if you were trying to pull a wagon over the mud or dirt roads.
Steam engines quickly replaced horses and mules on rail operations. And it didn't take long for railroad entrepreneurs to set their sights on capturing the American freight business. A market cornered by the growing East Coast canals.
Just about the time it was taking them to build the canals to a standard where they would be really useful. You could build a railroad next to the canal and just beat the pants off the canal boats with a train. And the railroad simply technologically replaced the canals almost overnight.
Laborers built tracks as fast as humanly possible. By the 1850s, railroad tracks extended from the East Coast to the Great Lakes. In 1869, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads met at Promontory Summit, Utah, and completed the Transcontinental Railroad.
The railroad business expanded very rapidly because you could make a lot of money at it. There was hardly a holler in West Virginia that didn't have a branch line reaching a coal mine. There was hardly a hill or valley in the Pacific Northwest that didn't have a lumber railroad in it.
Railroads changed the landscape of America, creating new towns along their tracks, supplying the new population with building materials and other necessities, and carrying far-flung crops to markets back east.
They could send their money and their gold and stuff back from California to the bankers in the East so they could sit there on Wall Street and count their money. This was all because of the railroads. And people out west could get fancy French fashions from Broadway in New York and have it delivered to Market Street in San Francisco. All of the things that people wanted and needed could be brought in by train.
Into the 20th century, railroads continued to expand and develop faster than any other industry in the country.
What separates the United States from the rest of the world is that the American railroads were all private enterprise. They were all private companies, highly competitive companies, often run by robber barons who would have financial wars and the whole business.
Due to the infighting among the rival railroads, no cohesive system existed to move freight efficiently across the various independently owned lines.
During the First World War, there was concern that the railroads wouldn't be able to keep up with the demand for service. And the federal government took over the operation of the railroads under the United States Railway Administration. Their idea was to standardize railroad operating procedures and try to make the railroads more efficient.
Soon after the war, the government returned the rails to private enterprise. 20 years later, by World War II, the collection of independent railroads operated as a coordinated system, and no government intervention was needed. The steel backbone of the nation played its part in winning the war, but by the 1950s, the railroad's monopoly on freight transportation was quickly eroding. Trucking and the newly created interstate highway system threatened to derail the railroads.
Then the railroads, which were a network of little feudal domains of different railroads, all competing with each other in a system that was set up to compete among each other, were suddenly having to compete with a new outside competitor.
Railroads responded by merging, as well as upgrading and modernizing. And today, freight trains are still the #1 way to move goods long distances.